Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Last Friday, we got the third episode of The Bad Batch. Was it good? Was it bad? What did we think about it? You're going to find out right now.
You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars. Begins now.
All right, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. See, look at that. I'm almost tongue-tied already. It's Monday, man. Somebody's got a case of the Mondays right here. But I'll tell you what, though. I was actually pleasantly surprised by episode 3. I don't know what your overall thoughts were on the episode, but I actually thought it was kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of left me wanting more, of course, in typical Star Wars fashion. I think that with Omega, stepping up to the plate or whatever and kind of, getting involved. But it was really cool to see even Wrecker kind of showing that human side. It's kind of like what you said last week when we were talking about them kind of having that uncle feeling or that uncle kind of vibe to them. And you definitely could kind of see that just even with, food rations and making the beds, making a room for her and everything like that. I thought that was really cool. But I'm wondering about Record that hit to the head. I wonder if that activated that chip.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and I guess before we really get too deep into it too, because there's still a lot of people who are relatively new to this whole thing. They're not even really aware of the Bad Batch. The Bad Batch is basically they were actually renamed Clone Force 99, if I'm not mistaken. And they pretty much got their start in the Clone Wars, primarily Season 7 of the Clone Wars animated series. So it's one of those things where they took a story arc from the Clone Wars animated series, and then they basically created a spin-off series on it, which at first, like you and I had talked about a lot, is that neither one of us, I don't think we're really all that excited about it.
Yeah. It wasn't something that we necessarily wanted, but I mean, now that we're getting it, I mean, it's definitely cool. It's giving it. I'm starting to kind of see already by the third episode, kind of where this is going, and so I'm just
we'll
wondering.
get into the third episode, but one of the things that I wanted to do was kind of set things up and give our overall feelings on it, because it still is a relatively new series. So
Yeah, definitely. We're only 3 episodes in. You have the main characters. So far, we have Hunter, Wrecker, Tech, Echo, and Crosshair. And Crosshair, unfortunately, has kind of uh, gone down a different path. He's kind of trapped with the Empire right now as they kind of reinforce his whole inhibitor chip, and so that's kind of left the rest of the group to kind of go off on their own with their new little companion of Omega. And it's interesting watching them try to raise this child or kind of assimilate this child into their world, and try to have that sense of accountability for this child. So that's been cool. But we've also been getting some really good information as far as the Empire is concerned from Governor Tarkin. And that's really been interesting.
Well, that's actually what I was hoping to get from all this. I mean, honestly, if I had any, I guess expectations would probably be the best word for this series. I wanted to learn a little bit more about the development of the Empire during this time period, because, as you and I have talked about numerous times, we see the birth of the Empire at the end of Revenge of the Sith. And then, of course, we pick it up from A New Hope. And then a little bit before that, we have Rogue One. And up until this point, the only time that we really see the Empire in, I guess, an earlier stage of what we're used to is in Solo, a Star Wars story. But still, even with that, though, they're basically like firmly entrenched. I mean, it's pretty much the Empire that we know. It's just we're seeing them at an early time. But one of the things that I think is great, and by the way, episode 3 was called Replacements, and they're starting to deal with the themes of moving from clone troopers to stormtroopers.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things that I've really been curious about the whole time, because we see that they were firmly, even by the time of Solo, a Star Wars story, they're all stormtroopers.
Mm-hmm.
And Solo, I think, takes place. I don't actually recall the timeline for Solo. See, there's always something that I try to bring up during our shows where, I didn't get to research it ahead of time because it's just basically like something that comes up. But, it was probably, I'm thinking that Solo probably happened around the same time as Kenobi, maybe 10 years after.
Yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah, here's my whole thing is with this whole timeline. It's kind of becoming more apparent to me why the stormtroopers really are kind of stupid and they can't shoot because you know if you're looking at the timeline of this, like, okay, we had clone troopers who are highly trained. We know they're really good, as far as, carrying out missions and, I mean, whole Clone Wars, for Christ's sakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then, as we're seeing now that they're merging, or they're kind of not merging, but they're kind of like slow transitioning from clone troopers to stormtroopers. And of course, there's a serious loss in quality,
Yeah.
but they save money, you know. And I'm understanding why now, because if you think about the timeline between, let's just say, the Bad Batch and A New Hope, right? You know, there's a lot of stormtroopers. Don't get me wrong; like, the Empire is a mass. I mean, I'm actually really impressed at how many people they actually got to join the Empire. But you can see why they kind of like suck, because they probably haven't had much training. Because, like you said, by the time we get to New Hope, you got these whole fleets. You got all these different versions. You got snow troopers, scout troopers. You got the regular troopers. You got, all these other troopers. And it's like, well, when did you have time to really train these people? I mean, at least with the clones, they were already been trained since they were pretty much born or created or whatever. They were already pretty much like on it. Whereas these people who are volunteers, now you got to try to get them up to speed. So no wonder why they can't shoot.
Well, the thing is, though, I don't even think it was a question of the fact that they can't shoot. I think a lot of it is the fact that it's really more about, and of course they address this. It's really more about their loyalty and what they're willing to do. Because if you look at the example, and again, we're gonna start going through the storyline of the replacements episode, but right now, again, I just want to do some overall stuff on this because I think thematically, like you said, we're starting to see where this series is at least beginning to go. We can't really say definitively we know where it's going, but we at least see the path, I think, that's being set before us.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we don't really know how many seasons it's going to go, so we don't really know at what rate they're going to do this, but 19 years is the time period that you have between episodes 3 and 4. And you're right, it's not a whole lot of time. If you think about transitioning from one type of an army to another type of an army, that's pretty quick. And when you really stop and consider things like Solo, like Rogue One, we're seeing things even earlier than that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking maybe even 10 years. Now, granted, you could do a lot in that time, but it just seems like it's a somewhat accelerated timeline. And I think this is the problem that Star Wars is going to run into the more that they keep trying to tell these stories in between different things that we've already seen. And they've really been hitting episodes 3 and 4 pretty heavily. And I think that the more that they spend in that time period, the more they're going to have problems with continuity.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the continuity is definitely going to be a challenge, and they really have to really watch out for that, because there's so many things that are transpiring all within a few years of each other. And, you could really run the risk of, once again, screwing up the canon, which the people have already kind of started to see. There's a little chips in there, here and there.
Yeah, from
But,
episodes 1 and 2, exactly.
Yeah, but there's not completely enough to unravel the whole thing. But once we get, we often said this. When you're playing too close to certain time periods, that could actually happen.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's start walking through this episode. What go ahead and start walking us through this thing.
Okay, so this particular episode of Bad Batch, um, we kind of find, I guess, our heroes now. We kind of find them uh, traveling through hyperspace, and they get kind of shot out of hyperspace because one of their capacitors or engine parts kind of fail them, and then now they have to make this crash landing on this planet. And while they're on this planet, they encounter this weird creature that's apparently like hungry for electronic or electromagnetic
Yeah, like it.
energy.
Yeah, any kind
Like
of
it
a
feeds
power
off
or
of it,
something. Right.
you know. So of course, now they're going after this thing that it took their only power source that they needed to get off the stupid planet. So of course now they have to kind of go after it and go find it. So that leaves Hunter and Omega to kind of seek after this thing. Um,
Well, the funny thing about that too, I mean, if you really,
mhm.
I don't know about you, but when I was watching that, I mean, they had just installed the thing, right?
I know, man.
They
Yeah,
install it and then they walk away to like check something out or whatever. They come back and it's gone. I mean, how disheartening does that have to be? And I think
exactly.
honestly, this is one of the few times in Star Wars that I've really seen where you feel that despair. Because if you think about it, they're trapped on this planet. They've pretty
Right.
much pointed out that, look, this is the only one we've got.
Hmm.
I mean, if
And in
this
this,
thing doesn't work or it's broken or, something happens to it, we're kind of screwed. I mean, they're stranded
not
on
only that,
that planet basically.
yeah, and it doesn't look like there's much civilization or human life on that thing anyway. So it's not like you go to a shop and see if you can get another one repaired. It's
Hmm.
kind of over for you at that point.
Well, that's the other thing that I
um,
always look at too, right? Because they go on these planets and, people are like, "Oh, we'll just, find the nearest town and, do whatever." But it's like you realize this is like a whole planet, right? I mean, they're acting like this is a country or something or maybe even a state, what we would think of, or like a province or something. Something a little bit smaller, but it's like that'd be like landing in China and needing to find something that's in the US. And you don't have
yeah,
any mode of I mean, how are you going to do that? How do you know where to even go? I mean, granted, a lot of these planets are fairly explored. I don't remember if this particular planet was unfamiliar to. I guess it was because they didn't really know about those creatures, but it's even worse if
yeah,
it's an unfamiliar planet because now you have no idea where to go and look for anything.
yeah. And like you said, you have no idea what's even out there either. That's the other
Exactly.
part.
Right. You have no
You
idea
know.
what wildlife is. I mean, you have no idea of anything about it. And then, so, I mean, that thing becomes really important. And I just think that that was really hitting home for me in this episode. Like, they really conveyed it very well to me that you really felt that sense of urgency and despair and,
Hmm.
what's going to happen. And when, that creature does end up pretty much taking it, like literally seconds after they installed it, you really feel more so than I think at any other time where you have similar storylines. You really felt like that just hopelessness where it's
Yeah,
like, look, we
definitely.
got to get this thing back.
Well, the other thing too, and to that point, this is one of the few times that you actually see the heroes actually have to wear oxygen masks. And
Yeah.
that's something you see all the time in Star Wars. We saw a little bit of it at Empire when they
That's what it
were
actually
trapped
reminded me
inside.
of. Yep. When they're in
Yeah,
that quote unquote cave that was really,
right. Like some giant asteroid monster.
or Meg, if you saw the Family Guy special.
Right. I thought that was so hilarious that they
That
made
was
that
just
Meg too.
it was hilarious and wrong all at the same time. And what's even
Man,
funnier about it is when you realize that character is voiced by Mila Kunis. It was like this amazing looking, woman. It makes it even funnier.
yeah. But yeah, I think that um it was really cool. And I just thought it was odd. I mean, all right, she's like, I'm coming with you, I'm part of the team, right? And this is like, once again, we don't know what's out here. We're on the strange planet. We got to get this thing done. Like, I'm not trying to take a kid. And it's not like it's like a Anakin or like even like a Ahsoka age
I thought the
kid.
same
It's
thing.
like 8 or 9 years old. It's like me taking my little cousin Michaela out or something. It's just like, no, you're staying on the ship. Let me give me Wrecker or something, and we'll go out here and well, Wrecker kind of had a bit of a migraine, so again, I guess he kind of had the other guys kind of working on trying to repair something. So I guess those. So this would have been a good time for Crosshair to come with him, but unfortunately, he's
Well, and
you know.
this brings up actually a good point too, because I was debating some people. There's a couple of the Facebook Star Wars groups that I'm a part of,
Hmm.
and somebody basically was talking about how they hate the Omega character, and she's annoying, and it's like why do they always have to write things where these people have to babysit girls or something like that? And instantly this person wrote in like, oh, you hate female characters, blah blah blah, whatever whatever. And she hasn't done anything overtly annoying, and all this other stuff. And so I basically kind of wrote answering both of them going, well, first of all, just because somebody hates this particular storyline doesn't automatically mean they hate female characters. I think this is the problem that we have as a
Hmm.
society now, is like, if you say one thing, everybody's got to take it to the nth degree,
The, right.
like to the extreme pretty much. But aside from
Exactly.
that, though, I did say I don't really totally agree with him, and I kind of pointed out the whole parallels between the Mandalorian and Grogu, Anakin and Ahsoka. And it was like Ahsoka basically annoyed the crap out of me too, but she ended up becoming one of my favorite characters because of the growth. And
Right.
I agreed with the guy that actually, wrote the counter argument. Like, Omega really hasn't been that annoying.
I mean, it's kind of. I think it just kind of gets in the way, and I understand. I understand what they're talking about.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
because they're constantly throwing these like kids, and you have to understand though. Once again, what Star Wars was for, it was for kids. However, I do understand though, like even in the original trilogy, you didn't have that. I mean, Luke was a kid, but he was like 17, 18 years old, and okay, and he was even annoying at times, honestly. Like, even Han was like, he comes, oh, what's that flashing? And Han's like slapping his hand, like, stop touching crap, dude. Just sit down, shut up.
But it was a little bit
So
different. I mean, yes, it's true. It was kind of the same thing. Luke is about 19 in that, even though he looks like he's
mhm,
30. But that's just basically like, people back then looked older, right? But
right.
yeah, I mean, I just think that I agree in the sense that it is a story arc or storytelling device. I'll put it that way, that they do keep reusing a lot, that I think might be getting a little bit tiresome. But again, Star Wars is made for kids, and you got to introduce something that kids can relate to. But I think that they could do it better. And the thing is, if you really look at particularly this episode, there's a lot of darkness in this thing, man.
Oh well, yeah. I
I
mean,
mean,
definitely.
there was some stuff that was
Oh,
definitely
that's
like
just
not kid like.
yeah.
Or
Especially when we get to Crosshair. Like,
yes,
jeez.
yes, I
I was
know.
just
And I
like,
was
oh,
just sitting there
I was
watching
like,
this thing, going, really? I mean,
yeah,
kudos to them. But I think that
yeah. I know,
that's the
right?
thing. Yeah, because people, I think, see that Star Wars has the ability to actually go in these different directions, but it almost seems like they're always having to throw in something for the kids.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that the whole thing though, like, and I kind of agree with the person who said that, why do they always have to have someone babysit? Because honestly, like these characters are enough. Like honestly, like just their
Exactly.
interaction with each other,
Yes.
they're more than enough. And so you didn't need a child to kind of add this whole kid like thing. I mean, because think about it, like when we grew up, we watched G.I. Joe and Transformers. Like they didn't have kids in them, but we understood them. We understood their complexities. We understood, you know, you know, S- Superman and all that. Like they're dealing with like
Well,
they're
but wait.
adults and they're
Yes, but you also have to remember that they do always throw in something. And I even found this annoying as a little kid, by the way. And I was the audience they were going for. But take the Super Friends, for instance. They
mhm,
had to put in the Wonder Twins. The Wonder Twins were completely useless and unnecessary in that show.
True.
And I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, I know I'm the one that they're writing, like, it's my age group they're writing this for. And it's like, you got enough to
Yeah.
do with Batman, Superman, Green Lantern, all those guys. Why do we need to see the Wonder Twins and Gleek? It's
I
like, we
mean, yeah, that's
don't.
what I'm saying. Yeah. I mean, you got to, if you want the kid thing, we already had Robin, like,
Yeah, right. Right.
but back to this whole Star Wars thing, though, I think that, when we're dealing with this particular episode, I thought her character was, I mean, the thing I will say about it, Omega's character feels natural. Like, it feels like what a normal kid would do
For the
with their
first
parent.
time ever, that's exactly what I'm saying. Is the
It's like, okay,
fact
I
that
want to go
it's,
with my dad.
yeah.
Hey, how are you doing this? Oh, I want to learn how to do like, just like if you go with your dad, like, I want to learn how to fish. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
want to learn how to do this like you, dad. So it's like, yeah, I mean, that's what kids do, so I can
Yeah, I mean, I
understand
just
that.
exactly. And I thought the same thing. I'm like, you know what? Okay, I'm kind of tired of this basic storyline, but at the same time, I think for the first time they're actually handling it with the proper balance right away.
Yeah.
Because I was even annoyed by Ezra at first too.
Mm-hmm.
And that
I
was
forgot about,
closer,
yep,
I
that's another
guess,
one.
but.
Yep.
But let's get to some of these chats here because we have some people in the chats. Of course, Ronaldo, Joanne, they're joining us as usual, and of course, they've been chatting up a storm this whole time we've been talking. But Ronaldo says, "I love Omega. I've read comments saying she's as bad as Ahsoka in the Clone Wars movie, but I think Omega is 1,000 times better." And I would agree with that. I mean, she's nowhere near as annoying as Ahsoka was in the Clone Wars movie. I mean, even people that basically agree that Ahsoka was a great character will all agree that she was horrible in that movie. Now, I will say that upon rewatching it a couple of times, it wasn't as bad as I remembered it being. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that's because I'm looking back on it now with the lens of I've seen the entire Ahsoka story arc at this point. So when I
Right.
go back and watch that beginning, it doesn't bother me as much. But when that was the only thing that we had to see, it's like, really, this is Star Wars now. And then, Joanne basically follows that up with Jar Jar was for kids, and that's exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
And honestly, I think I understand it, and I understand the people that like the Jar Jar character, and I didn't. I mean, I have kind of a love-hate relationship because I think they just went too far with him. That's all.
Yeah,
He was
exactly.
too
They
front
just,
and center, and it was
yeah,
too over the top.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Um, yeah, I mean, like I said, Omega is a typical kid, and I think that's what's cool about her. Um, so I going forward into this whole plot though, as we're, watching the Bad Batch kind of, go on their own little excursion in their mission, on the opposite side of things, we see Crosshair back at with the Empire, and of
Well,
course they once again strength. Hmm.
before we get to that, we still have a couple more chats.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're still on the hold that thought though, because Crosshair is the other side of this equation that we have to get into.
Definitely.
I mean, and that's the reason why we're going over this whole episode too, because there's just so much to this thing now that it's actually really fascinating. But Ronaldo says also, just because characters like Grogu or Omega are for children does not mean that adults can't enjoy these characters because they're also adult friendly. Which,
Yeah,
yeah,
and they can relate, and adults can relate to, because of course 9 times out of 10 they're probably watching this with their kids, or they have kids, so they understand. It's funny because, like, as a parent, or as someone older, you're watching it from a lens now of,
I
like, you
was
might have
just
been
gonna bring
introduced to
that
Star
up.
Wars. You're introduced to Star Wars as a kid, but now you're the adult now, and then now
Yep.
you have kids,
Yeah.
and now you're like, "Ah, yes, this is so annoying." It's because, but you also understand, it's like, yeah, I get this is how kids are though. You know what I mean? And that's what's cool too, because the issues that these characters are going through in the Bad Batch. Like, yep, my kid did that yesterday. So it's
Well,
kind of
and
like,
it's funny because I mean, neither one of us have kids, but one of the
hmm
things that I think about this every once in a while too, because the perspective thing, when you're going back and you're watching any of the Star Wars stuff, particularly stuff that you saw as a kid, right?
hmm
And now you're seeing it as an adult. And I think about that. I think about the perspective that I see it in now, because, for instance, at the age I'm at now, when my dad was as old as I am now, I was
hmm
22, which is just wild because I can't even imagine that, right? So,
right.
when I was 7 or 6, he was like maybe 34 or something. And so
hmm
now I'm thinking in terms of when I'm watching these Star Wars movies that were coming out all during my 20s and 30s, and I mean, because that's the great thing is we're getting all this new Star Wars content now. It's
Right.
funny because I'm actually watching it through the perspective of somebody that was more my parents' age when I was a kid, but I
hmm
don't really think of that, right? Because I've been watching Star Wars all along, so I'm just still thinking about how I'm seeing it. But there's definitely a perspective shift. But I got to put this comment that Ronaldo put up. He says, "I don't think the Wonder Twins are worse than Aquaman riding that stupid seahorse." I forgot all about that.
Yeah.
Aquaman,
Yeah.
his portrayal in that whole thing was
Yeah.
it was a little questionable. But then he has another thing that I think is going to lead now into our next discussion. So he says, "Do you think Crosshair can be redeemed? I believe that he's already lost, but it's Star Wars. He'll probably be good again, or kind of good as he was."
Yeah. So here's one of the things I do like about the Omega character is that the difference between her, I think, and a lot of other like kid characters that we've seen
Mm-hmm.
is that she's kind of has the inside scoop on the Camino side of things. Like she understands because she's breaking it down to them. Like, yeah, that's what the chip was for. It's not his fault. It's this is not who he really wants to be. It's just the chip is making him do it.
I'm glad
So
you brought that up too, because I almost forgot to make that point. Is the fact that another thing that I really love about the Omega character is that she actually, unlike even Ahsoka, but a lot of these normal kid characters, that are there to provide comic relief or to
mhm.
give the protagonist something to fight for, basically,
or a bunch of grief. Like, I
or a
gotta carry
bunch of
this kid
grief,
around.
or kind of like that comic relief, almost like a kindergarten cop kind of thing or something.
hmm
One of the things that I think is great is that she provides exposition. Like she really
Yeah,
has a real story-based reason for being there. And I
yeah,
think that that's what a lot of people are missing.
and she identifies with these clones because she herself is a reject.
Hmm.
So by that, she's kind of like, I feel like I belong with you guys more than anyone else because, although she hasn't discovered her special talent or ability yet, like the rest of these guys have, she still feels a part because she's like, you know what, these guys are more kind of like how I am, where like I don't agree with stuff. I think this is wrong. I think, I don't just follow what everybody else is saying. Like I kind of have my own mind. And I think that's kind of the thing that they're trying to show in this character is that like children having their own sense of direction and knowing right from wrong.
Yeah, because a lot of times adults tend to not really look at children as people, with
hmm
independent thought and things like that. And, granted, they don't have the experience, they don't have the development, but still,
Right.
from their perspective, I mean, they are people, So
Yeah.
I think it's also important, besides to feature characters like Omega in these things, because there are things that you can not only use for furthering a storyline, but also teachable moments. Because
hmm
again, Star Wars is basically a fairy tale. It's the moral of the story. It's there
hmm
to teach really children of all ages. Even
Right.
us. But I think that it's a good point that you bring that up about her also being a rejected clone and everything else, because I think a lot of times people forget the Bad Batch is so named because they're rejected clones in a sense. It's
Mm-hmm.
not because they're, these renegade going against the grain, like they're bad as far as disposition. It's kind of like if you say, oh, I have a bad batch of batteries or I
Mm-hmm.
have a bad batch of whatever. The whole storyline surrounds these clones that were considered almost rejects because they weren't like the other ones, or the regs as they call the regulars.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that will follow orders, the ones that, these guys were actually looked at as they were just kind of like you said, rejected clones, but they ended up actually having attributes that are desirable more so than the
Mm-hmm.
ones that were normal. And I think that that's a good
Mm-hmm.
message too for kids that, hey,
Yeah,
you know,
I'm different,
yeah, man, I
but
kicked my light out again. But yeah, I'm different, but there's still something I could do. Like maybe it's a
I
handicapped
still
kid
have
or
value.
learning disability. Exactly. It's something that um you know, people can write. It's like kind of a teachable lesson kind of a thing. So I
Yeah,
mean, I think that
but
that part's cool, and Omega kind of represents that.
yeah, definitely. Or just not even just so much like just the kid that's quote unquote weird, in school.
Mm-hmm. Outcast.
It's like the outcast kid. It's like, okay, you're not cool like the rest of us, but it's like, no, but I still like that kid is probably like a tremendous artist or or they have some special talent that is just like, man, if they really focus and hone on that, it could take them far more so than like the kids who just think being cool is a talent, which it isn't. It's like that's not really a talent. It's just a byproduct of something, or you're just mimicking others something else. But look at and going back to Ronaldo's thing as far as Crosshair is concerned, do I think he can be redeemed? Um, sure, I think he can. I think they probably will redeem him at some point. Um, I think that that's probably going to be definitely one of those missions where they're going to try to find a way to figure out how to destroy that inhibitor chip in him and bring him back to being, at least the normal crosshair that they were accustomed to.
Well, here's the thing that I find really interesting about that, because the next part of the story, of course, is that the inhibitor chip, and again, we just have to remind people, maybe more casual fans or whatever, that you definitely, this is basically all based on the whole Order 66 thing. So Palpatine had the Kaminoans implant an inhibitor chip. So when he activated this order, it would basically supersede all their other programming or conditioning or whatever. They would then immediately turn against the Jedi and kill them all. But
Mm-hmm.
what's funny about this inhibitor chip where Crosshair is concerned is if you notice, they keep doing stuff to that chip to keep them obedient to them. I mean, it's beyond
Mm-hmm.
just Order 66. So what I'm
Right.
finding really fascinating about all this is that at what point does this cease to become programming where they have to keep doing stuff, and at what part does this become almost
Mind
conditioning where Crosshair just becomes this way,
or
you
it's
know?
like mind control. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, in looking into this whole thing, so going on to that side of the story, we see him and we kind of see what Tarkin has the plan for him is basically he's kind of like the new leader of this new squadron that he's trying to put together. And he's kind of trying to see some things. He's trying to see like, okay, do we need this type of technology in our troops or can we get by without them? So this other um
Is his name
administrator basically,
Rampart? I think it's
I think
Rampart.
so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where he's like kind of pushing for what's going to eventually become the
Be
Stormtrooper program.
stormtroopers. Right. And so he brings in his people who are just, regular citizens who kind of decide to join the empire and
Well, they're
they're
soldiers.
and
They
yeah,
basically are like, I guess, mercenaries or something.
well, yeah, they're soldiers. They join the empire because they're looking at this as a way to feed their family. And I love the fact that they once again humanize them. They
Yes.
once again are showing them that this is like, I'm doing this because you know, I'm just trying to put food on my table and keep a roof over my family's head. That's it. So for me, it's just a job. But one thing I did notice, and I don't know if this is so, were those death troopers?
I'm not sure.
Because
I
they
was
kind of, I
wondering
mean, because
that.
they
I
had
know it did kind of have
it
that
had
vibe to it.
yeah, man. And I was just kind of like, well, this is sweet because of course, I've always wanted. I love the death troopers, like, and I love their look. With the green tint on the, it's like the night vision goggles as the lenses on their helmet and stuff. It's just such a cool look to me. So when I first saw them in Rogue One, I was just like, oh yeah, you know, these guys are no joke. But to see that, like, okay, they even have issues with Crosshair. They're like, oh, he's a clone. Obviously, we're much better than him. Otherwise, why would we be here? So now you kind of have that kind of, I guess, if you want to call it like, almost like a discrimination type thing, if you really want to call it that, they're kind of
Well,
like discriminating
and they've
against
been
him
bringing
because
that up all
he's a
along.
clone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they even in episode 1 and 2, right? The regs versus the Bad Batch.
Mm-hmm.
They can't sit with them, at lunch or
Yeah, that whole
whatever. I mean,
segregation thing. Yeah,
yeah,
it's like
exactly. It's like,
the 1960s over there.
yep, they're dealing with a lot of the stuff that, we deal with today. But the
Mm-hmm.
other thing that I think is cool is that you have a lot of different elements going on in this series already that they could explore, richly explore. One is what you just said, the whole almost prejudice, segregation, we're better than you kind of thing, looking down on other people. And that could be anything, right? It's the outcast thing again. You're the outcast.
Mm-hmm.
You're not one of us. You're not like us. They could pursue that. The other thing is the whole stormtrooper program. When it's going to switch from clone troopers to stormtroopers and how the clones that are left now have to deal with that. And then you have something that we haven't really touched on. We briefly touched on it today, and I think maybe we said something about it in our last review, but one of the big things that I'm seeing that they're probably going to pursue here is the fact that the Kaminoans now are kind of like our cash cows going away. They're
Mm-hmm.
no longer wanting to make clones. We got to keep that going. We got to keep them dependent on the clones.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they're trying to plot in the background a little bit about, how can we keep this going? Which I think is
Yeah.
really cool because that was one of those things that I sort of thought about when I saw Attack of the Clones when it came out. When it's like, okay, we know this is going away and it's all going to be stormtroopers. Well, these Kaminoans are obviously making a ton of money off of this.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody had to have had a problem with that.
See, this is how you could tell when you're an adult Star Wars fan versus a kid Star Wars fan. When you're looking at the social economics of things, like, I don't know,
Yeah.
man, and then
I don't
and
know,
they're
man.
bringing that in.
I thought of
It's
that
like
kind of stuff
expensive
as a
to keep
kid, though.
making. Well, you grew up in the 70s,
Yeah.
but I mean, that's the thing. I just think that it's really cool. It's really interesting. And I'm glad they're bringing all these different things into Star Wars. So that way we can get a wide scope and see how all of this stuff is playing into each other. You got the financial department in there. You got HR in here. You got, everything. You got the military. You got all these different aspects of government and things like that, like of that nature going on. So it's really, really, really interesting. And when Tarkin decided to send them on their own special mission once again, he's like, all right, let's test this theory. Let's just see how these guys do when they go off and, go after Saw Gerrera's camp again.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if they can finish the job. And so this is where, you were talking about earlier. This is where
it
things
gets a
get
little
really
bit
dark. Yeah. And so now they're gone to back to that planet again. And this time, they ambush, the, I guess, a little rebellion. And as they're going, they realize, like, okay, the only people they've killed are, the soldiers, but now you got like families, like women, children, fathers who are just, just regular civilians. And once again, the stormtroopers, well, I won't say the stormtroopers, the soldiers who they recruited, um, they're kind of have their own mind. They're like, no, man, we're not doing this. We're not going to kill these people. I mean, like,
Well,
they're
because
innocent.
what it was it was like they killed the soldier ones, but it's kind of like, okay, these are civilians. All they're trying to do is get off of the world. They're not a threat. They're
Right.
not, it kind of
Exactly.
reminded me of the beginning of The Running Man a little bit.
Hmm.
Because that was the whole thing. Schwarzenegger's character refused to, fire on the innocent civilians, and he disobeyed orders, and then he was like
Yep.
punished for it. So, but of course, we know from what happens next, the clones don't necessarily have that issue.
Yeah. So Crosshair, you know, this guy, he walks up to this, poor person. And is like, oh, do you have any information? No, man, I don't know anything. Oh, you're no use to the Empire then, and just shoots him this point blank range. You're just like,
Yeah,
dude.
I know.
Then on top of that, and then after that, it's just he's like, okay, well, wipe him out. It's almost kind of like that whole. It reminded me of Force Awakens
Yeah.
with Finn, and
Yep. Yeah. That was
it
exactly
was
like
that whole
that.
yeah, the whole situation. And when their leader kind of tried to stand up against Crosshair, Crosshair just basically put a blaster in him too. And it's just like, all right, you guys still want to stay around. And so then that's when you could see the horror in the villagers' faces, because it's like, man, these guys are different. These aren't like Clone Force, 99, or then definitely, not like even the other clone troopers. I mean, this group is, especially this guy leading them, is completely unhinged.
Well, and that's what really fascinates me about this transition from the clone trooper to stormtrooper thing, because the clone troopers were always seen as, if you saw one of them, you're like, yeah, the clones are here.
Hmm.
Now it's like, oh crap, the clones are here.
Exactly.
And it's almost like that's how they feel about stormtroopers. So it's sort of like the clone troopers were basically like the heroes and approachable and people that would save the day. And it's how they're going to transition to become feared. And it has to be, in the eyes of the citizens, really strange that these people who were once their protectors are in essence now basically almost turned against them in a way.
Yeah. And to see how and they had like different types of weapons too. They like this, one of them had like the whole flamethrower thing. So of course, like, when he's Crosshairs, like, get rid of him, and you hear that flamethrower ignite, and
I
then you
know.
hear the blasters and then the screams. You're just kind of like,
That was pretty chilling. I have to
I'm just
admit,
like,
and what's
I mean,
funny
it was
is
like a.
like, well, lately what I've been doing is when I watch these now, I actually turn off all the lights. So it's
Mhm,
literally kind of like a movie theater kind
like a
of
movie
thing.
theater.
And it really enhances it.
Hmm.
And yeah, when that scene came on, I mean, I was just horrified. And I was kind of like,
Yeah.
man, this is a, this is going into some pretty dark territory here. I mean, this is almost like Mandalorian or even worse dark.
Well, yeah, that's why I said it's just like Force Awakens, because same thing happened.
Yeah, that's
You
true.
know, they had them all like lined up and as a firing squad, and they just
Yeah.
basically Kylo just, yep, wipe them out.
And you're like, yeah, this is not George Lucas's Star Wars. But I mean, that's one of the things that I think is cool. And I think, unfortunately, what's happening is when people are seeing stuff like that, it makes the kid stuff stick out more, I think.
Hmm.
And I think that that's why
Yeah.
people maybe, because, and this is a problem I think Disney has had with a lot of their stuff, is the fact that on one hand, they're trying to still be that Star Wars is for kids thing, but then they're trying to put all these like darker, more adult stuff into it. And in some cases, it can work out okay as long as it's not to the extremes. But that was crazy. I mean, that was pretty dark. That's like,
Yeah.
I mean, just almost like R-rated subject matter.
Hmm.
And
At
then
least
there,
PG-13.
at least, I mean, granted, yeah, because with PG-13, one of the other moments that sticks out in my mind, of course, is the end of Revenge of the Sith when Anakin's crawling out all burned and disfigured. And I mean, that
Mm-hmm.
was a pretty intense moment, too. And that was George Lucas's version.
Yep.
But I just think that it's interesting how they're trying to walk this line. And what I really think they ought to do is kind of like what you and I have always talked about, make some Star Wars content more for adults, make some more for kids, like Resistance and stuff like that. And then I think they'll be okay. Before we go on, let's get to some of these chats because they're okay. Let's go way back here because we can address some stuff. So Joanna said, "Are there Clone Wars comics?" Because it was an earlier reference. Ronaldo was basically talking to her in the chats about a Bad Batch a comic. And in this case, they didn't actually do a simultaneous comic release or anything like that for the Bad Batch. But because I've actually gotten this question before from other people, like some of my other friends, because they know I'm really into the Star Wars comics now, they'll talk about Clone Wars comics, which, yes, there are. But if you're looking for information on the Bad Batch, it's season 7 of the Clone Wars animated series. And again, I cannot stress this enough for any casual Star Wars fans out there. If you really want to catch up on a lot of the stuff that's going on in the Star Wars canon, particularly with all these different series that are coming out, the Clone Wars animated series is pretty much a must-watch. I mean, you almost have to watch at least the Clone Wars. I would even say Rebels as well. But definitely the Clone Wars, because that's where a lot of this stuff is coming from. And in fact, the Bad Batch, like I said, they had referenced that in earlier seasons. But the Bad Batch, as we know them in this series, really got its start in season 7. So that, that's just basically something that I've gotten that question even from, people online when I do that whole Q&A thing. Because there is just a lot of material out there. Ronaldo says, by the way, they are not Death Troopers, but it seems to be a precursor suit. And yeah, we know they're not Death Troopers simply because there's not even Stormtroopers yet. So, I mean, if there's no Stormtroopers, there's definitely no Death Troopers. But it does seem like it's a precursor because, as Daryl pointed out, you have the Flamethrower, which is kind of like the precursor to the Flame Trooper. And again, a lot of these guys were pretty much, I mean, if you think about it, when Lucas established the original trilogy, you basically had the regular Stormtrooper, you had the Snow Trooper, you had the Biker Scout. And then they just started coming out with all these different variations when the Clone Wars stuff hit. You had the Jet Troopers, you had, some of the other ones, and then, of course, the sequel trilogy started adding more, and now you just got, and then, of course, we get Rogue One, and then you get the Death Troopers, so you have all these different style troopers running around. So, let's see, what else do we got? Okay, here's one I wanted to get to. So Ronaldo says it is suggested that the Kaminoans are going to create a new clone. And there are theories saying that the Great Starkiller will appear by this means. Now, that would be interesting. If they bring Starkiller in as kind of like a new version of the clones, that could be cool. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm definitely curious as to, what they're referencing as far as, because they made reference to Django's genetic material kind of degrading
Right.
over the course of time, and so that's why you're getting all these like defective clones, and so we're gonna have to switch to something else. And he's like, well, how's that project you're working on coming? And
you got that bag I gave you.
Right, I was definitely thinking about that.
I'm sure, because that line was almost delivered exactly that same way.
So I'm kind of wondering, what are they going to do with it? But I'm also wondering, okay, what are they going to do with the original clones? Because you still got thousands of clones, troopers. So when you do eventually switch over to the the stormtrooper. I mean, how many other are you still keeping those, or do you
That's
just
kind
starting?
of that's what I've been basically talking about. That's why I've been really. That's the one thing that I was looking forward to from this series, which it seems like they are going to deal with it, because it's like you said, it's not just the fact that they're recruiting new actual, humanoid creatures or whatever. Because I don't know if everybody's a
Hmm.
human that's a stormtrooper. I mean, I assume so, but
That's a good point.
basically, it's kind of like you said, man. They've got all these clone troopers out there. Do they just all give them a nice little severance package and say go settle on some? I doubt it, because these guys
Right.
have military training. If the
Hmm.
rebellion had recruited them, I mean, that would be, you know,
Yeah.
that's what I'm
Exactly.
actually surprised they never went in that direction. That's what I would do. I would actually try to come up with a story arc. Obviously, they're not going to be successful because we don't see them in the original trilogy, but it would be kind of cool if they did a storyline where the rebellion tried to recruit all the clone troopers. Now, we do get, when they try to retroactively say that, I think it was Rex that was in Return of the
Hmm.
Jedi, that was that one bearded guy or something.
Yeah.
But, that was just a little retroactive thing that Lucasfilm threw him a bone and said, okay, cool. Fine.
That's
We'll
right.
say that's Rex.
Right.
But that's not, what I would actually, that wouldn't be my first choice. But hey, whatever. Ronaldo says if Star Killer appears, it would be kind of cool, but it would be a bit out of place to me. And that's the thing. That's one of the dangers. I mean, I know Starkiller is a really popular character, and The Force Unleashed is a great video game, has a cool
Hmm.
backstory, but it did come out before Disney, I think, bought Lucasfilm. So I'm not even really sure if they totally canonized it yet.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, what are they basing his abilities off of, though? Like, if they were to bring him in, like, where is he getting his force abilities from?
Right, because if they do bring him in, and because it's kind of like you said, it almost sounds like something that the Kaminoans were doing. I
Yeah.
don't know if it's another thing like Django where it's like, okay, you're cool. Let's take some of your DNA or whatever and create clones. This almost seems like Palpatine level stuff that they're talking about here.
Yep.
But what's interesting to me is that, again, it goes into that storyline of like, oh man, we're about to lose these, huge clients of ours. We got to
Hmm.
come up with something new, something cooler, like a shinier new toy that we can dangle in front of these guys so that way they'll keep giving us money and keep buying our product.
Right.
And that's what I'm really hoping that they do, is something along those lines.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and bouncing back to to the Bad Batch. Um, you know,
Bouncing back to the Bad Batch.
I didn't
It's a
even
lot of
intend for
bees
that
in
to
there,
sound.
man.
I know, but I didn't even intend for that. But
I
oh
know,
well.
that's why I had to bring it up.
But so in their whole situation, of course, Hunter and Omega go out looking for this this power capacitor thing, and in the midst of that, Hunter is attacked by it, and he gets kind of knocked unconscious. Omega goes and down the hole trying to find it, and she starts to kind of discover like, oh, okay, this thing is attracted to power and things like that, and she eventually comes out the hole with what they needed, and she, of course, she showed great courage in doing that. And so I think now we're going to start seeing some more growth from her. We're probably going to see her getting trained a little bit more, probably by the Bad Batch. Um, and, of course, there was that whole, nice tender moment where they come back to the ship and they get it to work. It flies, it takes off. And then Wrecker reveals to Omega that he created like her own room on the ship. So she really felt a part of the crew and whatnot.
Yeah,
So that was really
because
cool.
she didn't even have a room there, and then of course we come to find out that she's never had her own room.
Yeah, she's never had her own room,
And
right?
so this is kind of, and it was, man. I mean, it was kind of a tear jerking moment. I have to admit, there's a little moisture in the eye when that came up because of her reaction, and it was so
Yeah,
good. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up too, when you were talking about her getting the part and all this other stuff, even that, which is basically a predictable thing. You know, the protagonist gets wounded, so the kid has to step up to the plate. It's almost kind of like a hero's journey kind of thing again. But
Hmm.
they did it in a very organic way, I thought. You know, it
Right.
wasn't like the way they usually do it. It was done in a way that I thought, once again, it was very realistic. They didn't overplay it. She went in, she got the thing. You know, she figured out that the creature was into power, so she just kind of threw her flashlight and it chased
Hmm.
it, used a little ingenuity, and then
Yep.
just went out and gave him the part. And there was no, like, you know, the thing came out and attacked. None of that.
Hmm.
It was just a very organic, more realistic, grounded way, I thought, of handling that. And that's why I'm saying with Omega, I think that they're taking that basic storytelling trope or whatever, and they're doing it correctly. And I think that that's one of the coolest things about this is the fact that they're not overdoing her character that much, if at all, really.
Yeah, definitely. I think that she's going to she's going to prove to be very useful, especially like I said with her knowledge of the Camino system. You know, as far as like getting Crosshair back and everything like that, I think she's going to play a very integral role and a part in that. And as she matures, we're definitely really going to see a lot from them. Um, I think Tarkin. Um, I would love to see, like I said, just he's one of those great minds in Star Wars, and so you want to see where his mind is coming up with, because he did notice that one didn't come back, but they didn't address the fact that
Mm-hmm.
okay, you see what I'm saying? So it's like
Right. He could have.
how
It appears that he thought that he was just lost in battle.
in battle, right? But yeah, it's a little bit more to that story.
Well, he kind of
you
was,
know,
but you
yeah,
know,
from a certain point of view.
yeah.
So it's really going to be interesting to see kind of like I said how that story and comes in, but you can see the conflict in him just a little bit when they
Mm-hmm.
walk back into his old barracks, and he's looking around the room and it's like his guys aren't there. This is his home with his guys, and now he's sharing it with a whole different group of people that he's not familiar with, and you can kind of see him kind of like something about this just isn't right. So you can start to see like there's kind of like that hesitation or that slow redemption
Well, it's going
to
to
be
be
coming.
interesting
So
to see how they carry it because I mean, obviously, if they really wanted to break the mold, they wouldn't redeem him at all.
hmm
But actually have him become one of the first Inquisitors or something. But the thing that I think that they're going to redeem him, obviously, but I think that what they could do is have it happen over a long period of time. Because what
sure,
I've always wanted to see, I wanted to see it with Vader, but of course we didn't get that. Then they had a chance to do it with Kylo, but they didn't do it that way either. It would be nice if when the villain was redeemed, now they got to face the consequences of that. So
hmm
it's kind of like, okay, redeem Crosshair, but do it, far enough in that once he is like, okay, I'm a good guy again, it's like, well, you kind of did a lot of stuff that we just can't get past. This is going to be like a long time coming.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm curious to see, like I said, once again, just how they play, and I love the Crosshair character.
Mm-hmm.
He definitely has that. He definitely has that whole Cat Bane kind of esque
Yeah,
presence.
that's what
I
he
mean, it's the same
reminds me
guy.
of.
Yeah,
It's
and
like his
that
voice is almost the same.
yeah, it was done by the same guy. So
Oh,
he
that's
does
true.
actually he does all the Bad Batch. So he does every
Well,
one of
yeah,
the
I mean,
characters.
because he does all the clones.
Yep.
But I forgot that
So
he did Cad Bane too, though.
hmm and so he definitely has, even with the toothpick thing. I mean, it's basically Cad Bane, man. I mean, and so that's what makes it really interesting and cool um, to see him uh, to see how he's going to be redeemed. He's got that. You can tell he's more the war gritty guy. He's the guy that's kind of like no nonsense, really. He's all about the job,
Yep.
and so I could see them, of course, causing because of course they're going to send Crosshair after the Bad Batch, and of course he knows their moves, they know his how he thinks. So I think that's going to be a great cat and mouse adventure, just watching those two kind of try to play chess with each other basically on the battlefield.
All right. Well, in wrapping this whole thing up, what's your prediction? How do you think that this is gonna all play out?
Um, I think that eventually we're going to see what the Kaminoans are cooking up. I think in some ways they don't quite trust the Empire as well either. And I don't know if they're trying to bring this person in because this is a cash cow for them. I mean, I think that at one point, but I also think it's almost like another security measure in case the Empire decides to turn their guns on the Kaminoans and like, okay, well, we don't need you or your clones, so we're going to destroy everything. So I think they want to have some sort of backup plan just in case, like things go left. Um, I think we're going to see Omega, of course, continue to grow, and we're going to get deeper into Crosshair and this new group of soldiers he's commanding now. We're going to see what type of leadership that he's going to bring. We already kind of saw it a little bit. It's kind of like once again that no nonsense. People follow orders or people die, kind of few good men thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really going to be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Ronaldo basically thinks the Crosshair will be good again, but that he will end up dying. And I hadn't really thought of that option, but I could see that. Boatwright Family and Comics joins us. Unfortunately, we're getting really close to the end, but hey, man, it's good to actually see you again. It's been a minute, but
yeah, I was about to say it's been a minute. Yeah,
it's been a minute. So hopefully, you can watch Friday night and maybe rewatch this episode and comment on it. We'd love to hear it. But my prediction is, I think the Crosshair is going to be good again, but I think that's going to be the season finale. I think the season, and it could even carry over into the next season. I think what's going to happen is that Crosshair, like you said, is going to be sent after him. And I don't know if they're going to do like a 2 or 3 episode story arc on this, or if it's just going to be the finale episode. But I think that they're going to have like that whole confrontation thing. And then that's when either maybe at the end, or maybe they do a cliffhanger and the first episode of season 2, maybe they wrap the story up and then he rejoins them, because they could do a lot of it depending on how many seasons they go. Let's just say that they do an average of like what Filoni's been doing, like 4 or 5, right? And they could actually do a thing to where Crosshair's temporary turn gives them an advantage because he knows their tactics now. And, there could be a lot of different stories that they could draw even from the fact that he kind of went bad for a while. So that's what I'm hoping there. As far as the Kaminoan thing goes, I agree with you 100%. I think that it's going to be a situation where they're going to try to keep the Empire's business, but that they also have a contingency plan that just in case the Empire's doing something a little shady, or they think that, hey, these guys could actually turn their guns on us, we need to have something. Because right now, they've been going on good faith because the Republic paid them for the clones and all this other stuff. The Empire can just decide to take them over. And then just say, you know what? We're basically taking them and we'll let you live. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the trade-off, right?
Exactly.
And then I also agree with you that I think what's going to happen is that Omega is definitely going to play a much bigger role in this whole thing. I don't think that they're introducing her just as a foil for Hunter, or, kind of like they're going to learn to be softer and more vulnerable and like a father and all that other stuff. I think that there's definitely a reason that she's in there. And the fact that she is another clone and she hasn't discovered her power yet, or, whatever talent she has, that could be something that we find out maybe at the end of the season, beginning of next season. I think that's another thing that they're going to carry out. But the thing is, though, did they ever say how many episodes? This is a question for all you guys too. Did they say how many episodes this season was going to be?
I think it's 12.
Is it?
I believe so.
That
I
would
think
make
it's 12
sense.
episodes.
Because, the Clone Wars went like 22 I mean, they were kind of like a regular TV show. Whereas like they went 22 episodes a season, sometimes even 24. And I didn't think the Bad Batch was going to be that much.
No, I don't think so. I think it's smart to go half of that. Simply
Yeah,
because of the Clone Wars, you have so much story that you have to tell in that span of time.
that's true.
Whereas the Bad Batch, I don't think this is kind of once again, like that limited run, but it's not so limited where like there's still enough gap. There's still a lot of stuff you can cover in it, but not as much as the Clone Wars. So it's kind of sits right in the middle of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hopefully a 12 episode season I think is perfect because it's long enough that you can get into some
Exactly.
things, tell a bunch of really good stories, but it's short enough that you don't have to have filler episodes. And I think that that's one of the biggest problems they had with the Clone Wars sometimes is that you had not just filler episodes, but like filler arcs. Oh, Dwight actually joins us, and
Yeah.
he answers us. 14
Ah,
episodes.
14. I was off by 2. All right.
All right. Yeah. Well, still, it's definitely shorter than 22. So, I mean, I think it's important that they basically contain it to somewhere around there because otherwise you do run the risk of having filler episodes. And hopefully they also go enough seasons. Like, if you were going to, for me, I would pick 5 seasons. 5 seasons, I think, would be the perfect length for this show. What about you?
I'll probably go with 4.
Oh,
Just
you're
one
going to go
short.
with
I'll probably
4.
go with 4. Yeah. I just think because, like, we finished the season, okay. Because then I think we want to get things from Kenobi's perspective. I think that's where that's going to pick up.
Yeah, I could see that. Because it's true, you got Kenobi, you got some of these other things that are going to go out, and you don't. The other thing that would be good too, and this is what I'm hoping that the next step is, because the first step was they had a bunch of different series that were going to come out, and they were going to unite the whole canon. That was one of the things that Disney said we're going to do. It's like everything is going to be canon now. The next step, which they've started to do, is now we're going to start doing some cross-platform storylines. We're going to reference like things that there might be a movie that references something in the novels or something that happened on the Disney Plus series, and we'll reference that somewhere. They're starting to do these cross-platform story arcs. And now what they seem to be doing, or at least what I hope they're going to do, is they compartmentalize the storylines. So in other words, this part of the story will be told through the Bad Batch, but then we'll pick it up with Kenobi, and now we'll go to his perspective, and we'll tell another part of the story. So in other words, you get chunks, because the problem is that if you start trying to overlap the stuff, you run into the danger of continuity issues. Or they might violate canon somehow.
Right.
Or at the very least, they paint themselves into a corner. And they trap themselves, and they're like, oh, great, now we can't get out of this. And then they have to come up with some, like, really weird, wild story to explain it.
Yeah, definitely.
Because, I mean, and I'm sure this
points
is
are valid.
something... Yeah, and this is something that I'm sure we'll bring up. I don't know. It depends on what we talk about. Well, Friday, I know. Friday's show is going to be about, was it 10? It was like...
most over
powered Force users.
Force users, yep.
But was it 10?
I believe so.
Okay. We think it's 10. Keep in mind it's our show, and we don't even... But it was based on an article we read that we thought was really cool, and we thought it would be a good discussion topic for all you guys, because anytime we bring up the Force, our views go up. Like, everybody really has their opinions on the Force, right? If I want to get anybody talking on this show, all I have to do is bring up something about the Force. So we're going to talk about the 10 most overpowered Force users, who they are, why they're overpowered, and we'll see if you guys agree. We'll see if we agree. So it'll be a good discussion topic. But yeah, I'm really hoping that the Bad Batch goes, we'll say 4 or 5 seasons, and that, you know, they don't really keep it on longer than they need to. I think that that's one of the biggest problems that a lot of franchises face, is the fact that they keep things going longer than it really needs to go, just because maybe it's making money or whatever. You see a lot of TV series like that too. Like, they really should have quit at season 6, but they go like 13 seasons or something. That's something that would really be ashamed if it happened to this, because it really is turning out to be a good show. So, overall, what are your thoughts on season 3, episode 3?
It was a good episode. I'm looking forward to what episode 4 brings.
Yeah, I would say that, again, I think that this is going in a really great direction. I thought 1 and 2 were really good. I really enjoyed the way that they're handling, because now, unlike what they did with 1 and 2, we really focused on just the Bad Batch this time. It was the Bad Batch and Omega. They kind of had this like little self-contained episode. So I thought they handled that really well. I really like the way that they're handling Omega. Like I said, I think she's going to be more important than people realize. But at least they're not doing the typical annoying kid thing. So I like you, I'm really looking forward to episode 4. But the question is, we know what everybody in the chat has thought. Of course, we're going to be wrapping it up, but you can also leave your comments in the comments section. Let us know what you guys thought of the Bad Batch episode 3. And where do you think that this season is going to go by the end of season 1? Those are the 2 questions that we want to hear from you guys when we end this thing. So with that, probably next Monday we're going to do the season or the episode 4 review. This Friday we got the 10 most overpowered Force users. So you're not going to want to miss that. That'll be Friday night at 8 o'clock Eastern time. And of course, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button on this video. It helps us. We want to bring more content to you guys. And you can also hit us up at Head to Head SW on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. You want to buy us a blue milk? We're part of the Buy Me a Coffee program. We also have some packages if you guys want to do a monthly support thing. But hey, doesn't matter. We love you guys anyway. We appreciate everybody that watches and subscribes. And after all, we do this for you guys. So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.